Do the Dallas Cowboys need more help at wide receiver? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free in the App Store or Google Play. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including how much did the analytics department impact the Cowboys draft? Could we see more two tight end sets? But I want to start with this first question from Lucas, who wants to know, should the Cowboys be comfortable with the wide receiver room that they have right now, or should they consider signing or trading for a veteran and maybe have Jalen Tolbert slide down the depth chart a little bit?
I think right now they're just based on the words that have come out of their mouth, they're clearly looking to bank on the talent kind of developing, right? And the wide receiver position is one spot where you have a lot of up and comers, right? You've got Jalen Tolbert, who you're hoping will take another step this year to kind of finish taking that job as the third wide receiver. You've got Jalen Brooks, who you really liked what you saw from him last year in his opportunities to get on the field and play. You've got a guy in David Durden, who you really liked all throughout the training camp situation, and you're hoping that he kind of takes a step. So, and then on top of it, I mean, I keep going to throw it out. I mean, I know it seems like a throwaway name at this point, but they still also have Martavis Bryant, right? A guy who has experience in the NFL. Obviously hasn't been super reliable about being on the field and everything. But, if the thought process is that he's moved past some of that stuff, maybe he can contribute a little bit. And also Turpin, they have numbers at the position. The question becomes like, how well would they survive an injury at the position, right? Like how well would they survive a CeeDee Lamb injury
and that's the one for me. Like if Brandon Cooks goes down for a month, I think they can survive that. I think they can do enough on offense to survive it. If CD rolls his ankle and is out for a half, and then he misses the following week, like I legitimately don't know what you do. And listen, I understand, like you can't replace a CeeDee Lamb, but do you at least have the other weapons that can help you get by? I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer here is not one that everyone's going to love, but it's the classic. Who was the offensive coordinator for the Colts when Peyton Manning was the quarterback? I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, and we don't have a plan for Eft. It's like that's what it is. Like it's I think ultimately you're not going to find a wide receiver at this point, or frankly in the draft, unless you're drafting in the top first half of the round, who is going to adequately fill the role of CeeDee Lamb if he gets injured. I think if CeeDee Lamb gets injured, you're making offensive wide scheme, shifts to focus on more 12 personnel, maybe run the football a little bit more, try to survive the situation. And I mean, you're talking about a guy who, I mean, how many targets did he have last year?
Like it was almost 200.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not like you have a simple fix, even if you drafted a wide receiver in the third round, right?
It's just a different situation that they've been accustomed to being in, right? Because in 2020, you had Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. 2021, you had all three of those guys. And then even in 2022, you had Gallup. And then the problem was you didn't have the third guy. So that's why they went out and traded for Brandon Cooks. The problem is Gallup regressed over the last couple of years. It's an uncomfortable spot to be in. But I will say, kind of like the running back discussion that we've had, Landon, like if you need to grab not a number one receiver, but like a quality, capable starting receiver, that is another spot that like you can grab a decent contributor not only in the summer, but in preseason and into the regular season. Like you can grab a replacement level starting receiver if you need one.
And let's be honest. We're about to pay Dak Prescott. I mean, we'll see. We have already paid Dak Prescott a lot of money, and part of this is on him to step up and make up for the CeeDee Lamb loss. So
Sure.
that means making it work with lesser receivers when it comes time to. So yeah, I think that's the plan at wide receiver, and the question ultimately is it good enough? I think it is for now, because I think we're not playing games on Sunday. So let's see what this the upside crew has for us in the training camp. And then if it's not enough, then yeah, like Marcus said, there'll be opportunities for wide receiver. They won't be quite as incredible as the running back opportunities will be.
Probably not.
But will still be a spot where you can get a decent, usable wide receiver who can come in and catch a couple passes per game for you.
Now, I will say, I don't think this is all that likely, but I do think there is the possibility that we get to training camp and maybe the Cowboys just get all three of the big deals that they need to get done. Dak Prescott, Michael Parsons, CeeDee Lamb. And then you start to get into the season and you realize, hey, this team is pretty good. Like we can build around this team. And that's when you go out and start to chase maybe not the Amari Cooper, right? Because Amari Cooper was already a Pro Bowl receiver, but maybe somebody a tier below that of like, hey, this guy still has 2 years left on his rookie deal. We could flip a pick for him now, get him under contract for the next 2 years. It lines up with our timeline. Again, I don't know how likely that is, but that's always a possibility when it comes to the wide receiver position, assuming you don't need a bona fide number one guy. If you need that number two complementary piece, you can find that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the bottom line here is that there is no proper replacement for CeeDee Lamb. No one else has a CeeDee Lamb in the league. So, outside of having AJ Brown or Brandon Ayuk or some of these elite guys that have very similar skill sets, it's just not going to be a 1-for-1 replacement. So I think what it is a pivot to redistributing the ball a little bit more to wide receivers, running the ball a little bit more, using your tight ends.
I'll also say for the draft, they drafted one receiver in the 6th round, but we were kind of the point where like, if you don't draft a receiver in the first 3 rounds, it's probably not. I mean,
it's not moving the needle.
It's not moving the needle, right? Like, and the Cowboys just had so many other more pressing needs than a number 3, number 4 receiver. And the board also fell very well to them. So they didn't have to reach on a receiver. They were able to take a center in the early, the top of round 3. They were able to take an edge rusher at 56. So I wouldn't be surprised if receiver is high on their needs list in 2025. I think this group is more than passable, but I think a lot of it relies on Jalen Tolbert. Like we're going into year 3 for Jalen Tolbert. Everybody said how improved he was last year during training camp. And we saw some flashes of it in the regular season. They need him to be that third guy. If it's not, then they're going to be in big trouble.
I mean, he was basically the third guy at the end of the season. He had taken that job from Michael Gallup.
Yeah.
We had talked about it, like the snap counts had already been falling in his favor for several weeks by the time the season was over. I think it's that. I also think, not to tease our third segment a little bit, but I think that's another portion of something that they're interested in doing is playing more 2 tight end sets. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think it's a comprehensive solution to replacing CeeDee Lamb. It's not a one player solution.
I might disagree with you on the tight end thing. We're going to get to that.
Let's see it.
Yeah. But let's talk about the analytics department, because this was the first time that the entire analytics department was present during the draft cycle. How much of an impact do we think it had during the Cowboys draft process? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count. Right now is a great time for the NBA. We've got the second round of the playoffs starting this weekend. We've got unbelievable matchups. The storylines are crazy. I can't wait to see Anthony Edwards go up against Jokic and Jamal Murray. It's going to be so much fun on the Western side of the bracket. So again, go visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count with America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel. Again, FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every dayers, we want to let you know about our great show that is out right now. It's the Locked On Sports Today show. Are you having to turn down ESPN or Fox News because it's all that unnecessary shouting that you just don't need in the morning? Listen, I like to have a stress-free morning, and those shows certainly don't help me out there. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or in the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Lane, let's get to our next question, which listen, we've been wondering about the analytics staff for a while, but two different questions. This first one comes from Jake. Some of us were critical about how the draft went last year, premium picks used on non-premium positions. How would you rate the Cowboys process this year? The second part to this question is how much of an impact do you think the analytics staff had?
I'll answer the second question first. I think that they had a pretty serious impact, and I think that the process was very good because of it. Right? I think we don't know I don't know what John Park was whispering into Stephen Jones's ears, or I don't know any of the conversations that are had. But I think it's probably not coincidence that they, drafted players at positions of high value, in these early picks. They were able to trade back and get the players that they needed, and not only that, but also get the incredible value in the trade in the return. To get that third round pick was way oversold by the other team. So I think that, combined with some of the individual kind of conversations that happen that maybe we're not privy to, that it's hard to kind of identify as, oh, this is an analytic conversation.
Right.
I have a feeling that there's thousands of those that we're just not aware of, that are on individual prospects or case studies done about specific positions and that sort of thing. So I think it is very difficult to kind of parse where the analytics department specifically is having an impact without kind of speaking to them directly.
Well, what the exact question is, do you think there was any single pick that the analytics department had some influence over?
I would say that the trade is probably itself
That's
is
exactly
where they
what I
have
was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about a single solitary pick. Look, I think the trade is probably the thing that they most had their hands in, right? I would say as far as picks go, it's probably something like, Jerry leaning over and saying, "Hey, what is the percentage of this guy falling to our next pick based on,
I think that's it.
like that sort of thing?" Or hey, what is the percentage of hit rate on second round, running backs versus third round running backs? Like, it's that sort of, they have like a large role in some part, and then like a kind of a question answering role in other aspects. So it's sort of all over the place. But if you're asking for the most singular effect that I think that they had, it's probably in getting such great value in that trade back.
I also wouldn't be surprised if just a general theme was go take athletes, right? Like, hey, we could look at their first three picks. Tyler Guyton had like a 98 percentile Ross. I think Marshawn Nealon was 91 percentile. And then Cooper Beebe was in the upper 90s as well. Like, your first three picks were all great athletes. I also think that just happens to align with Will McClay's belief of take athletes early. So it's probably why they mesh pretty well. I got to believe that a lot of the things that they believe are similar. I do think it is interesting, the positional value. We actually talked about this pre-draft. We loved Graham Barton. I still love Graham Barton. I think he's going to be an awesome player. But how does the positional value of a center / guard, because maybe they thought Graham Barton was a guard, match up with the positional value of a left tackle? How much better of a guard / center would Graham Barton have to be to outproduce and out earn, let's say, got on contract, a Tyler Guyton who ends up, let's say he's an average left tackle. How much better how much are you saving by drafting Barton over Guyton? And then once the trade part of it came in, I think it made their decision a lot easier.
Let's think about what analytics is, right? It's large scale studies of huge data sets, right? To be kind of condensed down to a belief, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of questions that are going to be asked, right? Like the kind of, like you just mentioned, like historically speaking, how good would this center have to be better than a equivalent first round tackle? How many
I got the numbers right
centers were
here.
taking this and that? It's like those are the kind of questions that they would have answers to or have information on that like helps kind of break down large concepts
Yes.
into a little bit smaller bite sizes for them to understand.
So this is not very deep analysis. So I'm just letting you know. Let's say that Graham Barton turns out and he's the 5th best center in the league, right? And you're projecting with the cap kind of going the same way it's been going. The 5th best center in the league right now is making about $12.5 million a year. Okay. Let's say that Tyler Guyton ends up being a top 20. Sorry, not top 20 left tackle. Let's say, what do you want to say? The 14th best left tackle in the league?
Yeah, let's say middle of the road, 15, 16, 17, right?
You're talking about like $17 to $18 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
So right there shows you like, hey, even if Guyton ends up only being an average left tackle, we are still saving, and Barton turns out to be as good as we think he's going to be, we're still saving $5-ish million a year by taking the tackle over the center early. That is one example of a conversation that the analytics department could have with a Jerry Jones, with a Stephen Jones when you're on the clock, and hopefully before that, when you're in your pre-draft meetings and all that kind of stuff.
And even that conversation, maybe they could have had without the analytics department. Where things get a little bit easier, when you have the analytics department is when you're trying to figure that out. Which again is still going by your gut without the analytics department.
Yeah.
But it's easy. It's even more complicated when trying to figure out that scenario when you add in the trade back and that you're going to potentially take another player at that position. So trying to figure out the math of all that. I mean, that's why, and especially while you're on the clock, like that's why you have an analytics department to give you those answers immediately without having to do a bunch of research and wasting valuable time.
I also wonder, like we heard that the Cowboys had opportunities to trade back with all of their day 2 picks. So that's pick 56, 73, and 87. I also wonder, like, were they hearing from their analytic team, like once you get to day 2, trade backs are good, but you don't get as much value in as long, if you have a guy on your board that you think is significantly better, it's not necessarily worth dropping back 8 spots to pick up a 5th round pick. You're almost just better off taking the guy that you want there. Again, I'm not making any of these conclusions for the analytics department. These are just sample conversations that they could be having with the scouting staff and the front office.
Yeah, maybe at some point, if we can, we'll see if we can try to wrangle somebody from the analytics department to come
I think
on
we
the
can
show. I feel like we can make that happen based on his past history. So I think that would be a good thing to, they can't give away all their trade secrets, but they can at least kind of help give us an idea of where they're making decisions and that's where they're having influence, that sort of thing. So I think it'll be interesting.
If we can get some secrets, that'd be great. That'd be a great show.
Well, we'll see. I mean, depending on how long that guy's going to have the job after speaking to us. Or
all right, let's talk about 2 tight end sets, because the Cowboys obviously have Jake Ferguson going into year 3. They've got Luke Schoonmaker going into year 2, who they expect a lot of things out of. They signed an undrafted free agent tight end who we're actually going to talk about on Monday. Is it possible that the Cowboys are just going to lean into more, heavier sets this year? We'll discuss that more when we come back. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You guys have already talked about that before, but there's just so much good stuff in this game that we've got to get to. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. And the more that you win together, the more awesome prizes that you unlock. And there's so much to get, like these unique stickers that you can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes. There's also cool new playing pieces for you to travel the boards with. And there's hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings and heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton of them include their own unique mini games, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now for free on the Google Play Store or the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering your Twitter questions. This last one is from Phil. He wants to know, with the lack of a clear RB1, do you see the Cowboys passing more, specifically out of two tight end sets? Could they get Schoonmaker more involved?
I think let's talk about something real quick. I think that there is a possibility that they play more two tight end sets without playing a ton more jumbo sets, if that makes sense, right? Like I think that there's opportunities where you have a one on inline, tight end and a kind of a joker type player, right? Like whether that's Ferguson or John Stevens Jr. or, I think that there is an opportunity for more tight ends simply because of the fact that you've got tight ends, right? Like I think that it's going to depend a lot on how Scooney has had what kind of offseason Scooney's had, right? Is he healthy? Has he developed a little bit? I'm expecting a big jump from him because this is a guy that showed you that he could be a blocker, which is one of the more difficult things you can learn as a tight end. And I think he really just kind of needed to hone his receiving skills a little bit, but he has the incredible athleticism. He's the most athletic probably tight end we have outside of maybe John Stevens Jr., depending on what you're talking about. And I think that, his development is going to dictate a lot of how much more two tight end sets there will be. But even if that doesn't happen, even if he isn't developed to the point where you feel like you have to have him on the field more, I think that they will be playing some more two tight end sets simply because I feel like they are planning on maybe backwards from what the question asked. I feel like they will plan on running the football a little bit more, or at least running it more efficiently. And I think that having more tight ends on the field is probably going to facilitate that. I cannot wait to hear your rebuttal.
I don't disagree with any of your points. I think they're all pretty accurate. Like I think they have a lot of a lot of talent in the tight end room, not just with Jake Ferguson. They spent a second round pick on Schoonmaker. They really like the undrafted free agent tight end they signed as a UDFA. They gave him a ton of money. Peyton Hendershot is going into year 3 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
John Stevens was going to make the roster last year before he got hurt. So they've got a lot of tight ends that they really like. But I do wonder, in a make or break year, Mike McCarthy, who is just known for living in 11 personnel, if he's just not going to go back to what he knows best and just live and die out of 11 personnel. We know Dak does really well out of it. We know CD thrives from the slot. I think I would love to see them run more 12 personnel. I just won't be surprised if it's 75% 11 personnel again this year.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, I think more 12 personnel, we're talking, relative, not like more 12 personnel.
Oh yeah. Of course not. I just have a hard time believing that 12 personnel is going to be more than like 15% of their offense.
I think the reason I think it may be an uptick is because I'm banking on the fact that Schoonmaker is going to take a leap, and that he is, with his athletic prowess and his, his body type and his big frame, that they are going to want to give him more targets. So they are using more 12 personnel in order to use him as a receiver. I think the questioner asked was Phil. Yeah. Thank you. Was that, will they pass more while using two tight end sets?
I could see that.
Like I could see them throwing the ball from two tight end sets more for sure, just because I think that they will hopefully trust Scooney and their second tight end, whoever that may be at that point, a lot more than they have previously.
Well, I think you might have to do that there's a very good chance you're going to be starting 2 rookies on your offensive line. Like it might just make a lot of sense to pass out of 12 if you can keep an extra tight end in and keep Zeke in and have more 7-man protections. Like I think that's very realistic.
Well, passing out of 12 personnel that's preferred. because you're just more likely to have a higher success rate. Passing out of run formations and running out of pass formations is always a good idea. So I think that the opportunity to kind of line up and play some bully football and then, break out a play action pass from 12 personnel, I think that's just going to be more of the offense than it was previous. I don't know if it certainly isn't going to be the dominant part of the offense.
No.
But I think it will be more of a crutch. And again, to kind of answer the question about good enough at wide receiver, that's sort of how you mitigate some of that. If you're worried about wide receiver 4 or 5 not producing enough, you just play a little bit more 12 personnel and you give some of those targets that would normally go to wide receiver 3 to Scooney or to John Stevens Jr. or to whomever the other tight end is.
So if we have, again, very rough estimates, let's say 75%, 11 personnel, 3 receivers, 20%, 12 personnel. Where does that leave our fullback package, Landon, with Hunter Lipke?
Well, it's never going to be 20%, 12 personnel. I'd be surprised about that. And again, listen, my guy could be a one back if you want to put him back there.
RB1 right now, right?
Any problem with? Anybody want to question whether he can run the ball as well as anybody else that's on this roster right now? Because I feel like he can do it just as well, at least.
Yeah,
so
why not? It's going to be really fun to see and to track the personnel usage for the Cowboys. Do they lean more into the 12 personnel because of the lack of wide receiver depth? We shall see, but it's not a bad strategy. I do think that their 12 personnel package should be pretty efficient and effective this year. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. On Monday's show, we're going to break down 3 of the top undrafted free agent signings for the Dallas Cowboys, so make sure you tune in for that show. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you right back here on Monday.